In today's video, we will take a look at the strangest Sherman variants. During World War II and after, there were numerous designs and prototypes for the M4 chassis for various uses. Some of them made it into production, but most of them doesn't. In this video, we will take a look at some of the strangest variants, their history and intended use. T31 Demolition Tank prototype. This one is probably the strangest of every Sherman variant. Late in World War II, in November 1944, the Army Experimental Board was looking into a vehicle that can move in hostile environment and attack enemy fortifications. The vehicle was based on the M4 Sherman, and the large special turret was designed to house a pair of 183mm automatic rocket launchers on each side and two 30 caliber machine guns. The tank retained the original 30 caliber machine gun in the hull as well, and later the addition of a flamethrower was considered too. The center gun you see on the pictures is just a dummy gun. The main armament was the two rocket launchers. These both had drum-type magazines with a capacity of 5 rockets. Altogether, 30 rockets were carried in the tank. The vehicle received the designation of Demolition Tank T31, and 3 pilot vehicles were requested. The first pilot vehicle was finished in August 1945 and sent to be tested in Aberdeen. Mobility was as expected from the well-proven Sherman chassis. Also, the flamethrower and the machine guns worked as intended, as all of them were tested and used before. On the other hand, the rocket launchers failed to operate completely. One was completely broken, the other can only be rotated by hand. By that time, the war was over and funding was cut back, so the project was cancelled in 1946, as it was decided any further development of such vehicle should be based on a more modern tank chassis. The next one on the list is the 90mm gun motor carriage T53. By the end of World War II, the arrival of heavier German tanks such as the Panther and Tiger made the 3-inch gun installed on the M10 tank destroyers less and less effective. Prepared for this, the US Army started to look into designs for a new tank destroyer mounting the 90mm M3 gun. The first prototype was the 90mm gun motor carriage T53, which featured the 90mm gun placed on the back of an M4 Sherman chassis on an open mount and the engine moved to the center. After the first test, it was agreed to order 500 vehicles, but the tank destroyer force objected the order on the basis that the design was too rushed. The gun was mounted too high and affected the stability of the vehicle when fired. It also lacked armor protection and ammo storage room. Work started on an improved version. The T53E1 had the engine in the original position and the gun moved to the center of the chassis. A gun shield was also added for improved crew protection. Despite the changes, the improved version also failed the tests. It still lacked ammo storage and its high silhouette made it easy to spot. The project was cancelled in May 1944. By this time, the 90mm gun motor carriage T71, the M36 Jackson, was about to enter production. The T52 gun motor carriage was a proposed prototype to test out a bolt turret gun mount using a single 40mm Bofors gun and also two 50 caliber machine guns on the sides. The Army Committee recommended testing the gun mount on 2 pilot vehicles. The mount received its designation Combination Gun Mount T62 and the vehicle Multiple Gun Motor Carriage T52. The first tests were carried out from March 1943 at Aberdeen, but the results were not impressive. The small turret was too cramped even for a 2-man crew. There were some issues with the design as well, no storage or ejection port for empty shell cases, and also the turret traverse was too slow for anti-aircraft roar. The project was cancelled in November 1944. T33 Flamethrower Tank. By 1945, the US Army found that flamethrower tanks were very effective in the Pacific against Japanese strongholds and decided to develop even more advanced versions to mount the flamethrower coaxially with the main gun. This was the mechanized flamethrower T33 project. It required serious modifications of the M4 tank, and the result was the most advanced flamethrower tank of World War II. The base for the new vehicle was the M4 E2 Sherman Jumbo. An entirely new turret was designed, housing the E20 flame gun as a coaxial weapon. The vehicle also featured a hull-mounted E12 Air 4 flame gun. To save some weight, the vehicles mounted the lightweight M6 75mm gun, the same gun that was used on the M24 Chaffee light tanks. 3 pilot vehicles were built, and a total order of 300 units were planned for 1946, but as the war ended, the order was cut back to just the 3 pilot vehicles. Further testing on these vehicles continued after the war. The T33 tank didn't enter service in the end, but the E20 coaxially mounted flamethrower did. It was used on 105mm howitzer Shermans in the Korean War. Later, in 1953, two of the original pilot vehicles were converted into self-propelled flamethrower T68 versions. The turrets were removed altogether and the hull was covered with only a cupola on top. The Australian AC4 prototype. The Australian AC cruiser tanks used the M4 Sherman drivetrain and lower hull, mated with a unique upper hull much like the Canadian Ram tanks. During the development of the AC4 tank, the plan was to use the British 17-pounder gun, but there were concerns that the recoil from the gun will overstress the turret mount, so a prototype was built mounting dual 25-pounder howitzers, which when fired together created about 20% more force than the 17-pounder gun. The Australian tank development program was terminated in 1943. Rocket launcher T34 Calliope. During World War II, the US Army looked into ways to increase the tank's firepower against large groups of infantry. One of the solutions was the T34 rocket launcher. The rocket launcher was mounted over the turret of an M4 Sherman and featured 60 launcher tubes for 140mm rockets. First, they were planned to use at D-Day, but the tank's high center of gravity made transportation difficult. They saw action in various combat areas later in the war. Though the rockets were not very effective against fortifications, they were very effective against infantry, as they could cover a large area and the sound of the rockets had a psychological effect on the enemy troops. The rocket launcher T40 Whizbang. This was a similar vehicle to the T34 Calliope, but firing 180mm rockets from 20 tubes. They saw action late in the war in the Ardennes and in Italy. The Canadian Skink anti-aircraft vehicle. In 1943, the Canadian Army approved the development of a fully enclosed anti-aircraft vehicle mounting 4 20mm guns on the Grizzly tank chassis, the Canadian-built version of the M4A1 Sherman. The first test took place in January 1944. Originally, it was planned to build the vehicles with welded turrets, but the complex shape caused problems for the manufacturing, so they changed it to cast production. This caused delays in the project, and by mid-1944, a decision was made to cancel the project as the German Air Force was almost completely eliminated in Europe, so there was no need for new AA vehicles. The last addition to our list is actually from the Cold War era. The SO-122 was developed in Yugoslavia during the 50s and 60s. After World War II, a lot of Sherman tanks were transferred to Yugoslavia, where they ceased service long after the war. A project was started in 1956 to test if the uparming of the Shermans with more powerful guns would be feasible to try to extend their service life. They were looking at 100 and 122mm guns first. Later, the 100mm was dropped and work continued with the A-19 122mm gun. This was the same gun used on the IS-2 tanks. A new turret was designed, but the hull of the M4 was unchanged. First tests were conducted in 1965, but in the end the project was cancelled as the gun was too big and heavy, it lacked armor penetration, and by that time both the Sherman chassis and the gun itself were obsolete. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.